Hey guys, so today we'll be going over 5 tips that I personally use to memorize anatomy. And anatomy can be very scary because you have things to memorize like muscles, bones, ligaments, nerves. But with these 5 tips that I use, hopefully you can take away maybe like 1 or 2. Let's get started. So my first tip is using active recall. And if you guys don't know already, active recall is proven to be much more effective than passively reading or highlighting your notes or text. And active recall can be in a form of quizzing yourself using flashcards or just having someone else test you. Either way, you're kind of forcing yourself to recall something. So remember, recalling something is very different than recognizing something. And when you passively look at your notes or your text and you're just kind of like looking over it, but you're not really recalling it because it's already in front of you. The next tip I use is spaced repetition. So spaced repetition is based on the idea that you remember something better by actually forgetting it for a little bit. So the way I would like to use this in my studying is I would study something and then maybe take a break for a day or two if I have time, and then go back to it and study. So by almost like forgetting a little bit of it and then forcing myself to remember it, this strengthens the memory of the subject. Next tip, it's not really a tip, but it's a tool, and that's Anki. If you guys haven't heard of Anki, it's a free software for PC and Mac, and it's a flashcard software, so you get to make your own flashcards and test yourself. So I like Anki because it incorporates the last 2 tips, which is active recall and spaced repetition. It's active recall because you're using flashcards to test yourself, and it's spaced repetition because after each card you get to rate the card, and depending on your rating, whether it's like it was hard for you to remember it or easy, Anki has an algorithm where that card then becomes more frequent if it's more difficult for you, and it becomes less frequent if it was easier for you. So for example, if something was easy for you, it might show up again in 4 days, and by the 4th day when you look at it again, that term that was easy for you before comes back up and it challenges you to recall it again. So like I've mentioned in the past, flashcards are really great, but my rule of thumb is if you're spending more time on making the flashcards than actually studying them, then I really don't see a point. So this next tip is something I made. It's called cycled repetition. I don't really know the science behind it. I don't know if there is, but it works for me, especially when I'm in a time crunch and I don't have time to make flashcards or like little devices to help me remember. So the way this works is I would look at something and try my best to memorize it as quickly as possible, and then move on to the next subject or the next whatever it is I have to memorize. So for example, I will look at like, let's say A, and try to memorize as much as I can about A, and then move on to B and try to remember as much as I can about B, and then go back to A and try to recall as much as I can from A, and then look at the text or my notes, whatever it is, to kind of correct myself. And then I would also try to recall B and check myself, and after that I would move on to something new, let's say C, and try to memorize that. And then after that I would go back to A and then try to recall, then B, and then C, and then the next thing. So it's like I'm constantly cycling to the very beginning over and over, and I'm not using this time to make flashcards. I'm simply looking at it, trying to remember it, move on to the next thing, and then going back to the first, and then moving on to the next thing, and then cycling back. So that's my tip. If it works for me, especially when I'm in a time crunch. Sorry, I'm like really sweaty right now because I turned off the AC because I didn't want the sound in the video. But anyways, our last tip is to draw out whatever it is you're trying to memorize. So for example, I made a video on the brachial plexus and how drawing it out can actually help you remember it. It doesn't have to be artistic. It could be something simple, like a simple diagram, but simply drawing everything out and having the structures and knowing where everything is relative to each other helps you remember it better on exam. That's it for this video. Those are my 5 personal tips on how I memorize anatomy. Hopefully these 5 tips can help you on your next exam. If you found this video somewhat useful, go ahead and share this with a classmate, a friend, another student. This is John with Sports Science Student, and I'll see you in the next video.